Ahoy! The new LPTR comes with a lot of changes to mechanics in form of the combat overhaul, as well as the controller adjustments. And I wanted to talk about some specific ones because I've had a lot of people ask me how I feel about the changes, if I can talk about them in detail, what's better, what's worse, and all that stuff. So the first thing you're seeing right here is the new camera setting. If we go into the settings here, you'll see we have the freeform movement set whether to turn the camera towards the movement input direction, which, well, does what it says. So when I go backwards, I go towards the camera. And that also has other implications. So, for example, if I were to use an ability, this would still move in the same way, but I could, for example, walk like this, shoot, and then keep walking in the same direction without ever having to face my camera forward. In itself, that sounds pretty good. There would be a lot of advantage that can be gained through that, and it works with most abilities. Some things are a little bit weird and you have to kind of like think about it, like net shot, for example, but again, this is technically better. But there's a big problem, and that's the dodge roll. So dodge roll has been changed in so far that it's restricted on front and back rolls. If I'm rolling to the front, I only have like a little bit of rotation in there. It's kind of locked in the direction, and that is true for the back roll as well. And the side dodge is the only one that technically stays the same, but the cousin found out that that's not the case for this camera. So as you can see, there's hardly any rotation in there. Which is pretty bad. That's a big problem when it comes to anticipating where an enemy will go, or it makes it a lot easier to anticipate where an enemy will go when you know where they're going. And now to change that up and show you on the regular settings, we're going to switch this off. If I side dodge, I can basically do a 180, which gives you way more freedom in terms of where you can go and how much you can avoid attacks and how much you can reposition. There's some problems with this movement. For example, you can't really do a backwards evade properly. It's going to be forward and then it turns you around, which is obviously not what you want because you can't really go backwards the way that you did before. So that one's a little weird, for example. There's definitely a bit of a learning curve getting used to. And you can see, for example, if I have this set like this, I would still move towards the camera with my flash, but you can also do the camera direction for melee attack setting, so then your abilities will go wherever your character is aiming. And if we turn that off, then we'll go in the direction of where the character is facing. So in this case, the flash would go in that direction. Would be easier for the evade here as well. We don't have that turnaround effect in there. So that's something to tweak around with and experiment with. But again, as long as the side dodge isn't fixed, at least for light and medium, I don't see much value. And even in heavy, it's gonna be very good once they figure that out, or if they just nerf it for the normal version as well. Maybe they don't intend the side dodge to actually still be that strong. But until then, this is not going to be something that hardcore PvPers are going to be using for the most part, except the ones that are in setups that don't really dodge that much. Like in a heavy build, you don't really have much of a need if you're using shield primarily and you're not really dodging often. Another thing I want to mention on the side here, I've put my settings to very high right now, and I want to show you my frames are sitting at a stable 60 locked, which they normally don't on very high, so there seems to be further optimization. Sometimes things run better on PTR when there's not a lot of people around and everything as well, but very high normally feels fairly jittery for me, and this is no longer the case. I still run it on lower settings, I still was running it on medium before, but I think this is noteworthy. I think this is worth pointing out that I didn't realize until like an hour into PTR that I was actually on very high, because the performance just wasn't affected and I just stumbled across it when looking through the new settings. A big point of concern for many players are the combat changes though. And I will say, first of all, if you look in the top left corner right now, you can see my input latency. It is massive. It's 230, 240-ish. That's because I'm playing on an A server from Australia. So what I'm going to be doing here, you can see this in the basic attacks, that's going to be slower than normal. That's going to be delayed. That's been like that on every single PTR. So this slowed down attack here, that's not the new combat code. That's just how PTR basic attacks, unfortunately, are for me. And I think a lot of confusion when it comes to the feedback for these changes came from that, because a lot of people had been saying that their attacks are somehow like feeling very slow, and maybe those were just players that were never on PTR before. But other than that, if you look at this, this is how PTR felt for me always. There is no difference in terms of average performance in anything combat related. What I will say is, one notable thing that's different is that the queue time for attacks seems to be slower, and this is something that people from NA have mentioned that play on NA servers, which I believe to be correct. So for example, if I use Cyclone and then use a basic attack right after that, it should normally happen, but it will probably not happen. So I do basic attack beforehand, do Cyclone and press basic attack right now, and that basic attack is not going off. So I left click there, but nothing happened. I would have to attack later in the animation for that to happen. So this is a matter of queuing. If I do it later, like here, yeah, there's the basic attack. So that can be better or worse, depending. New World went through many iterations here. In the very beginning, the queue time was super long, and you was just stuck in animations when you had like changed your inputs entirely since then and wanted to do something completely different, but you were still working with the animations that you were already stuck with. Whereas then they kind of shifted it back, and now there seems to be an even shorter time frame. And there seems to also be an issue with people not being able to queue a certain amount of abilities. I was not able to confirm this, so I could, for example, queue a dodge into basic attack into perforate, I think. So I'm going to dodge, basic attack, perforate. You saw the basic attack there briefly, but it's like, again, slow down. But it cancelled into perforate afterwards. So all three animations were accepted, I would say. But maybe under specific circumstances for specific abilities, it won't work. And obviously, that's a frustrating issue. There are also certain changes that people have said about like tracking, for example, especially on skewer on the spear. That's one of those that doesn't really connect that well, and you can see that right now it's connecting pretty well from pretty far away. That would have probably not hit on the previous patch. So on some weapons this feels good, but there are obviously also some issues. For example, unfortunately on the hatchet, the running throw bug is still not fixed. I have apparently a quicker zoom in, another YouTuber whose name I forgot, I will link that down below, figured this out, that the scope basically is quicker. But if I throw a hatchet, I throw my rending throw, I left click afterwards, still holding right click, I still have the same bug where I'm stuck in light attack animation, even though I should be stuck in throwing hatchet animations. And the same YouTuber, the name is Volty actually, also found out that if you're doing a distancing throw, after a normal hatchet throw, it leads to some problems. So if we do a normal distancing throw, social distancing, it works, right? You can just throw it and run. But if you were to throw a hatchet first and then have a movement input and use social distancing, then social distancing will not go off, at least quite often. So I'm going to throw this, I'm going to be walking forward and then press social distancing. I press the button, I press my W button. It didn't happen. If I press it a little bit later, throw and then press it now, still not happening, throw, press it now, then it's happening. So you basically need to be entirely out of the basic attack animation for it to work, which is, again, obviously a bit of a problem. Nothing massive by itself, but somewhat frustrating, and this is also true for the blunderbuss. So you can do the same thing here, scope in, shoot, do net shot. I just pressed the button for net shot, nothing happened. If I don't scope in, same issue still. You actually saw the highlighter there. That actually makes it even easier to show. You see that the ability is getting activated. I'm shooting, ability is getting activated multiple times. It is just not firing until now, like many times later. So there's a weird delay there now that definitely shouldn't be happening. So that is bugged for now. It seems to be related to abilities that are tied to different movement inputs doing different things. So for example, with Athos Shrapnel Blast, that is not a problem. That fires as normal. And I would say almost smoother than before, considering my ping right now. Many abilities actually feel fairly smooth. Even on the Greatsword, which I feel like is one of the primary contenders for weird bugs when it comes to attack animations, I can do very much the normal cancels. Apparently there's an issue with Skyward Slash, but I was not able to replicate that on my ping. So yeah, generally everything mostly working as before. No major changes on most things yet, but what I have been able to test out so far that has been changed feels pretty good, honestly. Now I say this carefully because, for example, with the flail, I was testing that when it came out on PTR, and you may be able to see this right here. Yeah, it's super janky on this ping, especially Trip feels horrible on ping, and I actually thought that Trip was going to be a fairly bad ability because of that, because the animation just feels janky and jittery and it doesn't catch enemies properly. Whereas on live, where you have better ping, it's absolutely not an issue and it's a fantastic ability. So that is something worth keeping in mind, and that is why I think many things that we are testing here at the moment might not be fully representative of what we'll see in the actual game. But since things are generally working smoother, I think for most things we'll see an improvement, at least long term. There will be outliers, certain things that need to be changed, and I think especially the input queuing is one of those, and a couple of ones that need to be fixed. I'm sure there are more examples than what I've shown you here, but I think those are not that hard to iron out, and once that's done, they should be able to do a lot more with the system and be able to make it more responsive. Another complaint that some people had is that jumping is weird now. I kind of agree with that. It's kind of very short, like it's a very short hop. I'm not quite sure how that will affect parkouring in certain places as well. You can see it just feels a bit too much gravity, a bit more realistic, I guess, but a bit too snappy. So there are a few things, again, that need some tweaking, but overall, I think most of these changes are in a positive direction. There are a few other cases of abilities not connecting properly, like, for example, Sweep has that issue right now, but at the same time, you've got to consider here that while that's getting specifically reported now, Sweep has always had issues with not connecting. Every spinny ability, be it Cyclone, be it Sweep, be it Maelstrom, has always had issues with it not connecting properly, especially on uneven ground, which is very frustrating and something they should absolutely fix, which is hopefully more fixable in the new system as well. Supposedly there are also some changes to how ranged abilities behave and how quickly afterwards you can run again. I can't really tell, but this may be a ping issue as well, and maybe that the delay feels more noticeable or less noticeable depending on your ping. So you can see it here, there's a brief walking period and there's a running period, but it doesn't really feel different from live for me personally, but that might just be ping. Once we know more, I will of course let you know, so consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Also, if you want to get notified of my breakdown of the new items or info about Nightingale. If you'd like to support me further, you can do so on Patreon and get early trading tips in return. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that, and thank you for watching. SLOTH out.